Hey everyone, it's James Q Quick from Learn, Build, Teach, and I want to welcome you to another mini course called Build a Quiz App with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now this course is going to be perfect for you if you're looking to improve your core web development skills, because we're not going to use any frameworks, no libraries, no Angular, no React, no Vue, just plain old core HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now let's talk a little bit about the features and things that we're going to use in this course. We'll use some ES features like const and let. We'll talk about the spread operator. We'll talk about arrow functions, and then other JavaScript features as well. A few of the array functions like splice and map. We'll use local storage. And then in CSS, we're going to use Flexbox. We'll talk about animations and rim units. Now we're going to take all of those things to build some pretty cool functionality into this application. We're going to store high scores in local storage. We're going to dynamically request and retrieve questions from the Open Trivia DB API. We're going to build a spinning loader from scratch. We'll build a progress bar from scratch. And I think it looks really good. And I think this is really great core web development stuff that you guys are going to want to learn how to do. So again, I want to thank you for coming to the course. I want you to know that there will be resources for you to follow as well. There's a link in the description to the GitHub page that you guys will have access to all the source code. Part 1 through part 12, I think, is how many we have. So never fear if you can't get something, or if you have something going wrong, you can always go and grab that source code. And then in there, I've included links to additional resources if you need to do some additional reading or learning along the way. So again, I want to thank you guys for checking out the course. I'm really excited that you're here, and I'm really excited for this course. I really enjoyed recording it and creating it myself. I just want to leave you guys with one additional resource. If you're interested in checking out more of my content, my videos, my courses, you can head on over to learnbuildteach.com, and you can subscribe to my newsletter to get notification about all of those things as well. So again, just want to thank you and welcome you to the course. I hope that you enjoy it, and I hope you're ready to improve your core web development skills. All right, guys, so we're going to go ahead and get started by creating our homepage. So we're going to need an index HTML and an app CSS. So in the index HTML, we basically want a starter HTML5 template. In VS Code, you can do exclamation and then tab, and this will give you the scaffolding for an HTML file. So I'm going to change the title here to quick quiz, and I think that's good. So we're going to add a few different things in here. One that I forgot is actually a link to our CSS, so we'll need to add that. And this is called app CSS, so we'll change that from index to app CSS. So now we've got HTML file. We can add, let's just add an H1 here to test that this is working. And what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to use something called the live server extension to open our application on local host, and it basically creates a live reloading server, which you'll see what that means in a second. So if you want this extension, under extensions, it is called live server here. So go ahead and install that, and then when you've got it, sometimes you get an option that pops up down here, but I can always right click and then do open with live server. So what this is going to do, and it actually opened on the wrong page for me, a wrong instance of Chrome. So let me bring this over here. And what this does, again, it started a localhost server actually on an IP here, and then at port 5500. And so as I start changing this to be quick quiz, if I change this and save, this is going to automatically refresh in our browser. So this is going to make it really easy for us to see the changes as we make them, and just kind of speed up our process. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm gonna scaffold out this HTML, and then we're gonna style it, and we're gonna finish up the home page in this video. So what I want, and as I'm doing this, I'm gonna give another note. So emit are snippets or abbreviations that you can use in HTML and CSS built into VS Code. If you've never used these before, definitely check out the emit docs, and I can pull open emit docs. I can pull open this here for you. So docs.emit.io. This is going to incredibly speed up your HTML and CSS development. So definitely check it out, and then just kind of follow what I'm doing if you can. If you've never done it, you might go do some practice, but you can pause the video and catch up if you need to. So by typing .container and then tab, this is an emit abbreviation to create a div with a class of container. If I did a hashtag of container, that would give me a div with an ID of container. So by default, your emit abbreviations are going to give containers, then you can, or excuse me, divs, and then you can give it classes or IDs, things like that. So speaking of IDs, inside of this, I'm going to have an ID called home, because this is going to be our home page. And then I'm going to give it a couple of classes, Flexbox helper classes that we're going to create in a second, and we'll talk about what Flexbox is. So this is going to have Flex Center and Flex Column, and then I'll tab it over. So now I've got a div inside of my container div with an ID of home and a class of Flex Center and Flex Column. Inside of here, I want to have an H1 that does say quick quiz, and then we'll also have a couple of anchor tags to link to other pages in our application. One, the actual game, so the play button, and then a high scores button to go and view the high scores. So what this is going to be is an anchor tag with an href2 game HTML. And then we can also add some styling to this, and we're going to make it look like a button even though it is an anchor tag. So I just want to make a copy of this line, and then I'll change it from game to high scores, and then change the text here from game or play to high scores as well. So these are going to be two buttons that we'll see on our page. Obviously this looks really terrible right now, and so we're going to open up our CSS file so we can start styling these things. But we've got all the HTML here that we need. We just need to go in and add support for all these classes and things like that. So in our app CSS, one thing I want to talk about is using rem in CSS. Now rem gives you the ability to define your font sizes or margins and paddings relative to the root font size, basically. So if you change that root font size, anything using a rem will change accordingly as well. And I'll show you kind of exactly why we want to do this in a second. So you can read through some different articles on this. There's lots of content on it, but this is a pretty common thing that a lot of people use instead of pixels, for example, in this situation. So the way we're going to set this up is we're going to use our root selector, and that basically just becomes our HTML tag. One, we're going to set the background color to ECF5FF. And we should see a change here. It was very subtle. It's a very light color. It's almost a white, but it's got a little bit of blue in it. So that's going to be our background color. And then now we're going to change our font size to 62.5%. Now this looks really weird. The reason this is 62.5%, the default font size in most browsers is 16 pixels. So 62.5% of 16, if you do the numbers, is 10 pixels. So now the root size, the root font size is going to be 10 pixels. So anything that we reference with rems will be based on that 10 pixels. So we'll come back to that in a second. So the first thing I'm going to add is box sizing border box. Now what this means is if I add a border to a box, it's going to include the width of that border in the calculated size of that box. So if I have a box that's 40 pixels by 40 pixels and I add a 5 pixel border without box sizing set to border box, that'll really make your square 50 by 50 instead of 40 by 40. So with border box, that means that the 40 by 40 is going to include your box sizing. So that's what we want. So we'll have that. Then we'll have just set some font family stuff, and we're going to use Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif. Not going to get too fancy here. Then I want to reset basically all of the margin and padding. So we're gonna make sure that we control all of the margin and padding in our app. And then the text color that we're going to use is 333. So the reason using text color a little bit off from black. Black it can be pretty harsh. You probably won't see much of a difference here when I save. Well, you'll see the spacing change, and the color here is a little bit different. It's not as harsh as a pure black, so it's just something a little bit off. So I'm going to copy in a few things. I'm going to set a default margin bottom for our H1 through H4 tags, and then I'm going to overwrite these a little bit. I'm going to copy in some of these styles so that you guys save a little bit of time coding them. You guys can see. So what we're doing is we're saying H1, the font size is going to be 5.4 rem, And rem, again, is going to be relative to that root font size. So this is basically going to be 5.4 times 10 pixels, which is 54 pixels. And then the color is going to be a blue color. And then we've got a margin bottom here. And then similar stuff. We'll come back to this span. That's going to be used later on, but I've kind of got it in here anyway. And then H2 is going to be 42 pixels, and then a margin of 40 pixels. Font weight is going to be bold, or excuse me, not bold. H1 was bold. And then our H3 is going to be 28 pixels, font weight of 500. So when I save this, you'll see now this is going to refresh. This is going to be what our H1s are going to look like with this blue color. It's going to be pretty big. And then we still got to style our links down here. All right, so now I'm going to get into creating some of our, I call them utility classes. So usually in my CSS, I will leave a comment here and just type out utilities. And the first thing we're going to start with is container. Now this is going to be, the goal here is to provide some padding and provide some padding on the outside. But what we want to do is center all of our stuff basically in the screen. So we want this, this to take up the entire view width. So this will make it 100% of the view width, and then the height will be 100 of the view height as well. So this is going to basically make it take up the entire page. And then we'll have display flex, and we'll talk a little bit about what Flexbox is here in just a second. With Flexbox, we've got justify content center and align items center. And I think if we save this, we'll go ahead and see a difference here. So with Flexbox, which is relatively new in CSS, centering things is incredibly easier than it used to be in the past. So what happened here is display flex turns this container into a Flexbox container. And then since it's taking up this entire height and width of the page, justify content will center things horizontally by default, and then align items will center things vertically by default. So if I started this, the align items to flex start, for example, that's going to pull things up to the top. If I undid that and did justify content flex end, for example, it's going to push everything to the right. So Flexbox is definitely something you'll want to spend some time with if you haven't before, but just know that these three lines allow me to center things horizontally and vertically. All right, and then my max width, I want to be 80 rem. So basically what I'm doing here is, let me do an inspect here and I'll show you. It looks like I've got a typo here, so this should be 80 rem with no space. Now if I select, so if you look at, if I hover over my container, see that it stopped at this 800 pixels, which is right about in here. And then it has this extra content to the right. So what I want to do is set a margin 0 auto to go ahead and center that content as well. So this will just kind of make sure that as my screen gets bigger, there will be some padding, but as it gets smaller, it will take up the entire screen with that 100 viewport width and viewport height, but still keep it centered. So that's all we're doing there, is really just trying to keep all of our stuff centered inside of our application. All right, and then on top of this, I'm going to add any child of my container. I want to make sure that its width is 100%, so that we can continue to style things, or excuse me, center things horizontally. So I'm going to paste in just a few more styles here. You guys can grab them from the source code just to kind of speed this up a bit. So what I've got here is flex column will give you a flex box, and then it will set the direction to column. So typically, or by default, flex box direction is horizontal. Now we're flipping that direction to be vertical, so it's going to stack things on top of each other. Notice how play and high scores got stacked on top of each other. Flex center is going to align both justify content and align items to center. Justify center will just do justify content center. Text center will align things in the center, align text center, and then hidden will hide things if we need to, which we'll get to later on in the course. So just to kind of reinforce some of the things that you're saying, one, we've got that container, which is a flex box. It's going to center the main content of the page on the page. The home also has flex center and flex column, which means this is going to be a flex box with a vertical direction. So it's going to stack things on top of each other like this. And then it's got flex center, so it's centering all of that content as well. and then we've got our app name, and then our 2 buttons. So the last thing we need to do is actually style our buttons. And so I'm going to come in and create a section with a comment called buttons. So I'm just going to paste in some of this button code, and then I'll talk you through it. So we've got our class of button, and this is being applied to an anchor tag, but obviously we want to make it look like a button. So we've got a font size here with basically 18 pixels. We've got some padding. We've got a fixed width. We've got centered text. We've got a border here of 1 pixel, basically 0.1 rem. Got a margin bottom. You need to set text decoration to none because by default anchor tags are underlined, so we don't want that. Then we've got the color of the text and the background color. So save that, and we'll see the buttons pop up and look pretty good over here on the right. And then also we've got a hover state. So in the hover state, we want to set the cursor to pointer. We'll add a drop shadow here, and we're still using that blue color to do that drop shadow with a little bit of transparency. And then we'll do a transform. So we're basically going to move this thing up just a bit. I guess that's 1 pixel. And then we'll do a transition. So we're going to not just jump to that position. We're going to let it transition over the course of a short period of time. So as I hover on these buttons, you can see that effect. Now these are pretty common styles for hover effects. So you're almost always going to do your cursor as a pointer. A lot of people add drop shadows and then do a little tiny transform just to kind of give that nice little subtle effect. And then I want to show you at some point later on, we will have a disabled button, and that will come when we're looking to accept high scores. So we've created this for now. Basically what it's going to do is it's going to change the cursor. So instead of pointer, it's going to show something that basically says you can't click. And then it's not going to do that box shadow and transform. So we'll talk about that more when we get to that video. But for now, you can see we've got a pretty good looking homepage. These anchor links will work, but game HTML doesn't exist yet, and high scores HTML doesn't exist yet either. So that's going to do it for this first video. In the next one, we're actually going to go ahead and create our game page and go and scaffold out the layout of our game. So I will see you in the next one. Okay, so we're ready for part 2 here, where we're going to scaffold out our game page. So what we're going to need to do first is create a game HTML file, and then we'll also go ahead and create our game CSS file. So in game, we can do kind of the same thing we did with our index one. Use this Embed abbreviation to get scaffolding, and then we can call this quick quiz, and then just call this play, I guess, something like that. All right, so we've got that index HTML, or the game HTML file created. Now if we click on our play button, we should be taken to this blank screen, which is good. That's what we want. So in here, every one of our pages is gonna be inside of a container, and then we'll have an ID of game, and then a class of justify center and flex column. So these are 2 of the ones that we saw in the last one as well. And then just inside of here, I'm gonna have an H2, and this is gonna be our question. Say, what is the answer to this question? And this will also have, since we're gonna need to reference this, just want to give this an ID of question. So let's go ahead and go to our play screen, and you'll see that we've got it, and it's showing our H2, but it doesn't have that background of the container, and it's not centering our content. That's because we didn't include our app CSS. So we're going to include the app CSS here. Oh, if I could type it right, app CSS, and now it looks a little bit more of what we expect. Now we will have enough styling in here for the game page itself that we're actually going to create and include our game CSS as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that while I'm thinking about it. So this is going to include the game CSS. Okay, so we've got our question up here, and now we're going to need 4 different answer choices. So what I'm going to do, and this will become a little bit more apparent as we style it, I'm going to start with a class of choice container. Now this is going to be the overall container for our choice, obviously, pretty self-explanatory. And then inside of that, we're going to have a p tag with a class of choice prefix, and the prefix is basically going to be A, B, C, or D. All right, so this first one's going to be A, and we're also going to have a p tag with a class of choice text. So this is going to be choice 1. So look at this, It should show up here really tiny actually, which is fine. We'll come back and style that. And we're gonna need 4 different ones of this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, just copy and paste in that. So this will be choice 2, and it'll be B, and then we'll have C, and choice 3, and then D will be choice 4. So now if you save this, this is the overall layout for our choices. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and style this stuff since we already have it all laid out. So we're gonna start with our choice container, and we want this to be a display of flex. Again, we're gonna set some margin on the bottom between the different answer choices, which will be 0.5 rem. We want this to take up the entire width, so we're going to make this width of 100%. The font size will be 1.8 rem. And then we're going to give it a border, so a 0.1 rem solid, and then we'll use an RGB here so that we can do some transparency in the end. So this is going to be 86, 165, 235, and then an opacity of 0.25. So it'll just make it a really subtle color for us. And then the last thing is the background color will be white. So you can see it's got the background color white. It's got the border. It doesn't have any padding or anything. So the way we're going to do this is these individual items inside of here will have their own padding. And this is so that if you look at this, notice that the blue color fills up the entire box here. So this is why we're going to have this inner element at its own padding instead of padding on the container itself. Hope that makes sense. So to do that, we're going to do our choice prefix, and we're going to say padding is 1.5 rem on top and bottom, and then 2.5 rem on the sides. And then our background color is going to be our blue color. So 56A 5EB, I think that's right. And we'll set the color of that text to white. So this should be looking a lot better here. So those are looking good. Now we need to do our choice text. And we just really want to do some padding on here. So we'll do 1.5 rem. If I spell it correctly. All right. So that's looking pretty good. The only thing we're missing here is the hover state. And the hover state is going to be basically exactly what we did with our buttons. So we're going to do choice container and then hover, and then we're going to say cursor pointer. We'll do, and I'm just going to copy these in because we've used them before. So I can actually grab it from our app CSS, grab the hover stuff, copy it over, paste it in. And then this should look pretty good, right? You can see those answer choices with a nice little hover effect. So just kind of a side note, if we were using something like Sass, we could reuse this little piece of code here to create a mix-in Sass so that we could reuse it instead of just copying and pasting the code over to different parts of our application here. So we're not doing that. So this is kind of where we are. We could do give each of these things so an extra class, and then add the hover state like honestly a hover class maybe or something like that. But this is what we got for now, which I think is fine because we're only going to use that in those 2 places, which is good. So we've got our game page created and styled with obviously dummy content. In the next video, we're going to go and load all of our choices from an array of questions and then handle moving through questions as the user tries to answer them. So that's going to do it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, so to be able to dynamically update our questions and pull them from an array, we're going to need a game.js file. That's where we're going to do all of that stuff. And just to make sure that it gets included, we need to come into our game HTML and do a script tag referencing game.js. And we can just check that this is working by doing a console log saying hello. Oops, actually, if we could type this correctly. Hello world from game. So if we save this and then do an inspect here and open up our console, you should see that log statement there, which is great. I'm going to actually give, since we're going to be doing a little bit more JavaScript stuff, I'm going to put these side by side and give a little bit more room to the code, or excuse me, to the browser, so that we can pull open our console every once in a while when we need to see something in JavaScript. So we've got this thing working. Now we need to get a reference in our JavaScript to several pieces of our HTML elements. And so the first one is our question. So it's got an ID of question. That makes sense. Then to get a reference to this choice text, this is the text for the choice, the answer choice that we need to update. To get a reference to this, we could give each of these an ID and have it be, choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, choice 4. But there's a better way to do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to query based on the class choice text. And that'll give us a list of those choices, and then we'll update from there. Now we're also going to add a little piece of information to each of these so that we can distinguish between them. So data number 1, basically this is going to be a custom data attribute that we're going to add to each of these, and we'll use this in a minute. But this is just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is so that we can differentiate between these different choices when we query, when we select all of them. So we'll kind of see what that means in a second. So a couple of things that we want to do is we want to get a reference to the question. So question equals, and if you've never done DOM querying, right now we're going to do document.get element by ID. And this ID is going to be question. All right. And we're going to do a lot of these get by ID. So I've got a shortcut here for get ID. That's the snippet that I created in VS Code. You can look into creating snippets yourself and kind of set something up like this. And I can show you what it looks like in my JavaScript. So get element by ID. This is what the snippet looks like. So if you want to go and add the snippet in there yourself, you can. And what it does is, it'll probably be easier just to show it. So if I trigger this, it's going to scaffold out all this stuff, and then I just type in what I want to be getting. So we don't have another by ID right now, but I'm just kind of showing you guys in general. I could have done get ID question, and that would have done all that stuff for me much quicker. So snippets in general are pretty useful, and you might, as you do things repetitively, you might go ahead and add some of those in VS Code. So the next thing we want is our choices. So again, this is going to be pulling from basically a class name. So want to do get elements by class name, and that class name is going to be choice text. And I want to show you just the log here of choices. So this is where we want to have our console open. So choices is actually going to be an HTML collection. It's a node list is what it is, or actually maybe HTML collection is different than a node list. So if you do a query selector all, it gives you a node list. Here it's an HTML selection. But regardless of that, we want to convert this to an array so that we can do use some array functions on it. So we can do that by saying array.from, and then passing in that HTML collection as the parameter. So save this, and then we'll refresh, and now you'll see that we've got an array of these 4 different choices. And inside of here, you can see there's a property called dataset. Dataset is where you add custom properties, and it's anything that's prefixed with data will basically become a property on that node. So it strips out the data dash part, and then it just takes number and whatever value you give it here. So that's where our custom attribute is that we'll use in a second. All right, so we're going to need to create a couple of variables here. We're going to do a current question variable, and it's going to be an object that we'll talk about in a minute. We're going to create a variable for accepting answers, and this is so that we can create a delay. After someone answers, we create like a second delay before we let them answer again. We're going to need a score that's going to start at 0. We'll need a question counter, which is at 0 as well. So this is basically what question are you on? Then we'll have an empty array of available questions. And available questions is basically going to be a copy of our full question set. And we're going to take questions out of the available questions array as we use them so that we can always find a unique question to give the user. And then I've got a questions array with some dummy data in here. So I'm going to copy this thing in, and you guys can grab this from the source code or take your time and pause and paste this in if you need to. But what this is each question is going to be an object. It's going to have a question field, which is actually the question. It's going to have a choice 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then it's going to have, it's going to tell you which one is the answer. And I didn't do answers this integer as 0-based indexing. It's actually starting at 1. So this 1 means it's going to be this top one here. You probably figured that out by the question. So the way we can use this is we can dynamically get access to this choice, check to see if the choice is correct, basically by seeing if the number in that choice matches up with our answer. So we'll see more specifically what that means in a minute. And just a few more things we needed to do. We need to create a couple of constants. These are going to be a few things necessary for the game itself. So one is the correct bonus. So when you get a answer correct, how much is it worth? And we're going to say 10. You could tweak this if you wanted. And then the second thing is max questions, and we're going to start off with 3. So this is going to be how many questions does a user get before they finish basically. So let's start by let's create a start game, and we'll just do a couple of things in here. So we're going to set the question counter. Just make sure that it's starting at 0. It probably is, but we're going to basically use this as a reset. Then we're going to set the score, and then we're going to say available questions. We're going to copy in all the questions from the questions array, and you can use the spread operator here, which is three dots. And what this is saying is take this array, spread out each of its items, and put them into a new array, and that's what available questions is going to be. So if I do a log of available questions, it's going to be, oh, we actually have to call the start game function. So at the very bottom here, this is what we will do eventually, is call start game. And so now you'll see that available questions is basically a full copy of the questions array. And the reason we need to do that, if we just assigned available questions to questions, when we make changes to either one, it's going to affect the other. They're both going to be pointing to the same thing. We actually want it to be a full copy, which is why we do the spread operator to get a full copy of all those questions from the questions array into available questions. All right, so the last thing we're going to do in start game is called get new question, and that's a function that we need to create here. So let's copy this. That's going to be our next function. And I didn't mention this, but I'm using arrow syntax, fat arrow syntax, ES6 for ES6 functions. And this just gives you a more concise way to write functions. So this is the function name. These are the parameters. If you don't have any parameters, you need to have the open and close parens. If you just have one param, you can just type it in without the parens. But we don't have any, so we need to have the open and close there. So the first thing we want to do is take that question counter. We just want to say ++. So when we start the game, this will increment it to 1. Now we need to get a random question. So what we're going to do, and I can show you guys in here, we want to get a random number between 0 and 3. So the math.random function by itself will give you a decimal between 0 and 1. If you want to get an integer out of that, you can do multiply that times a number, so times 3, for example. This will give you a number between 0 and 3. And then if we wanted to make that an integer, we can do a math floor on this to take the lower number of this. And just notice as I kind of keep running through this, it's going to give me a random number here. Which is what we want. So I'm going to take this and copy it. And instead of hard coding this to 3, I'm going to say available questions.length, because that's going to change. So if we start with 3 questions and we use 1, then we're only going to have 1 or 2 questions left in our available questions. So we always want to base this on the length of that array. So we're going to assign this to a variable called question index. And I'm going to get a reference to the current question by getting it out of the available questions array, available questions, and then use our question index. And now I want to set the question, the HTML element, the inner text, to be the current question. So the question that we just loaded and its question property. So when I say this, let's see, inner text, what I do wrong here? Did I misspell it? No, it looks like I have misspelled question here. You guys probably saw that a long time ago. Sorry about that. But notice that when I save and refresh this page, it's actually pulling one of those questions and displaying it correctly, which is awesome. So we want to do basically the same kind of thing for each of our choices. So what we can do is we can grab our choices. We can say for each. And this is going to iterate through each of those choices. It's going to give us a reference to each choice. And then inside of here, we want to get that that number from the dataset property. So if you remember, we set that data number property here. We want to get a reference to that number. And so we can do that by saying choice.dataset and then give me the number property out of it. So that's how you get access to those custom attributes. And then we can say choice.enter text is current question. So out of the current question, we want to get choice, and then we want to use that number to get the choice out of it. So if you look at our array here, questions, each question has choice 1, 2, 3, 4. So this way we can grab the choice property here, we can get the data attribute number associated with it, and we can use that to get the actual appropriate choice out of the current question. Hopefully that makes sense for you guys. So let me save this. Now you'll see that when I refresh, not only is the question being populated, let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see it a little bit better. All right, so not only is the question being populated, but so are all of the choices. Now one thing I'm looking at here that we probably should do is on our container, we'll just add, where's container in here? Container. We'll add some padding. So if we get to a smaller screen, we'll add, let's say, 2 rem on either side. So this will just give us a little bit of padding here to make sure that it's not right up against the edge. All right, so there's actually a few more things we need to do here. One, we need to take that available questions array and we need to splice out the question that we just used. So we want to use that question index. So that's going to tell it where to splice out, and then we want to splice out 1. So this is going to take the available questions array and it's going to get rid of that question that we just used, because again, when we get our new question, we don't want to be able to choose from that existing from questions that we've already used. And the last thing in here, I'm going to go ahead and do this now. Accepting answers is going to be true. So after we've loaded our question, then we want to go ahead and say, yeah, let's go ahead and allow a user to answer. And we actually want to set this to false originally so that they can't answer before we're ready and have everything loaded. So this is getting to be a long video, so we're going to try to work through this for just a few more minutes. Now we want to do another for each on our choices outside, and we want to grab each choice and we want to add an event listener. So add an event listener, and this is going to be a click, and it's going to take the event as an argument, and then inside of here I can just kind of log out e.target so we can see what's going on. So for each one of these, as we click, we should see the element as it finishes reloading. So there's the one, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. So we're able to click and get a reference to which choice they clicked. Now we need to basically take this data attribute number and check to see the real answer choice. So we won't quite do that yet. What we're going to do is first, if we're not accepting answers, so if we're not ready for them to answer, we're just going to return. We're going to ignore the fact that they clicked on it. Then we're going to set accepting answers to false, because we're going to end up having a little bit of a delay here. We don't want them to click immediately. And then I'm just going to get a reference to a few things. So get const selected choice equals e.target, and then selected answer. The way we get that is selected choice, and then the data set, and then that number property again. And the last thing we want to do in here is call get new question, because that's what after we've answered a question, then we want to go ahead and get the new one. So after I click here, which element does the script tag go in? Script, that one. So one thing I realized we forgot to do is notice I'm not getting any click action over here on the right. So the reason is, if we look in and inspect this text is not taking up the entire width. So we actually want to grab the game CSS grab the choice text and say width is going to be 100% also. So now we can click on these. Now, so what's going to happen is, since we are calling get new question after we've made a selection, it's going to load a new question. So you can see that kind of going through there. Then you get to a point where you get an error here and it says cannot read question of property. So what this is after we've used all of our questions, you can see that I've logged out that we have no questions left in the available questions array. So this is basically when the game's going to be over. So we want to check if available questions.length is 0 or the question counter greater than or equal to the max questions. Then we want to go to the end page, and to do that we can say window.location.assign and assign it to /end.html. Now obviously we don't have the end HTML file yet. That's what we'll do in one of the next videos. But this will go ahead and try to get it there. So if there's no questions left in the array, or if we've given the user all the questions that we want to. So we could potentially have a question set of 100, but we only want to let them answer 10. If this question counter gets above that 10, the max questions, then we'll go ahead and return as well. So if I save this one last time and then go ahead and click through, this should try to go to an end HTML page, which is exactly what we want. So that was a longer video. That was a lot of good stuff. I think we were able to load our questions from that array and then dynamically update the UI to reflect those new questions. So in this next video, we're going to add some animations for correctness when we answer our questions. All right, so in the last video, we got it set up to iterate through our questions, and then we were able to detect basically when the user has answered all the questions and then try to navigate to the end screen. So we're not going to work on the end screen just yet. We're going to add a new feature here for animations on correct and incorrect answers. So we want to basically change the color here of the answer choice to red or green, more or less, and then give a little pause before we switch to the next question. So the way we're going to do this is, one, based on whether or not they have the right answer. When they submit, we want to choose a class to apply. So the way this is going to look is, one, let me use the selected answer in the log that we already have. And what I just want to see, does selected answer equal our current question dot answer? And so let me save this, and hopefully, actually, let me remove any of these other log statements that we have as well. I think that's all of them. That one there. All right, so as I click on one of these, what's the correct syntax here? Script source. So this should be true, which that says false. The alert should be true, so it's looking like it's not correct. So let's log out the selected answer and the current answer when we click. So 1 and 3, it looked like for that one. The alert was 4 and 4, so that should have been correct. And where do we put the JavaScript and a script tag? So it should be 1 and 1. So that looked right. So let's do this one more time. I don't know what I was missing there. So where do we put the HTML script tag? So since what we're pulling out of here is a string and the other one is a number, we can't use triple equals because that's a strict comparison. It will actually compare the data type as well. If we use a double equals, that should give us what we're looking for. So where do we put actually syntax for this should be C. So that is true. If I do this one wrong, we don't put it in a JS tag, that should be false. All right, so we're able to detect whether or not the answer was correct. So basically, based on that, we want to figure out which class to apply. And we're going to have two different classes, a correct class and an incorrect class. So there's lots of different ways we could do this. I could start with a class to apply, and I could just have it be incorrect by default. And then say if, and then I could use this stuff. If it actually is correct, then I will just update class to apply to correct. So this is a pretty common technique to go ahead and give a default value. So instead of me checking to see does it equal this, if so do this, if it doesn't equal this then do something else, I can just set the default to incorrect, then check to see if it is correct, and go ahead and update that to correct. Now there's another way that we could do this is, and this is going to throw an error because I've already got it defined, but I could say const class to apply, and I could use the ternary operator where I could say selected answer equals current question.answer. And the way the ternary operator works is if this condition is true, then I will assign this value. If it's not, then I'll assign this value. So this accomplishes the same thing. If you are comfortable with the syntax, it obviously is just a one-liner. It's wrapped because my editor is short, but it's a one-liner versus 3 or 4 lines here. So I think this one is a little bit more readable. This one is, if you're comfortable with the ternary syntax, it's just as useful. So we've got the class to apply. Now we need to actually apply it. Let's just log out class to apply just to be sure that that's right. And this is kind of my process here. As I go through, I'll make sure I log stuff out along the way to check to make sure things look right. So that should be correct. This one should be incorrect. Okay, so that looks like it's working. So now we want to actually go ahead and apply this class. So we'll get our selected choice and we'll get the parent element. So what we're doing here is the selected choice is this piece of text that we're clicking on, but we actually want this whole, the container element. So to get that, we'll grab the parent element and we'll say class list dot add, and this is how you apply classes in JavaScript, and we'll add in the class to apply. So let me grab, let's grab this container. Let's click on it and notice that it applied this correct class here. So that's what we wanted. If we do it again, this is an incorrect option, so it should give the incorrect class, but you'll notice that it actually keeps the correct class as well. So what we want to do is do the same exact thing, except eventually we want to remove the class because we just want the class to be there for just long enough to show the color and then move on. So the way we're going to do this, and actually let's go ahead and do the CSS part of this first so we can just see what it looks like to add these classes. All right, so inside of our CSS, we're going to add 2 classes. One is the correct, and it's just going to be a background color, and it's going to be a green color. This is actually, I pulled this from the Bootstrap colors that they use for correctness. And then the incorrect is going to be the same kind of thing, but the background color is going to be a red color, DC3545. Let's just, 45. Make sure that looks like a red color. There we go. So now what we should see, since we've got the remove commented out, as I click here, it's going to add the class, but it won't remove it. So if you see a green and red, and then this should be another red, and then we go to the end page. So what we want to do is remove that class after we're done, but if we have these back to back, it's going to apply the class, remove the class immediately, and it seems like nothing happens. So what we want to do is use a set timeout to give a little bit of delay before we actually remove that class. So set timeout is a function built into JavaScript that we will call, and it takes a callback function with what you want to do, and then it takes a parameter of how long you want to be delayed. So inside of here, we're going to remove that class, and then we're going to go ahead and get the new question as well. So we're going to do all of that inside of this set timeout that is going to wait for 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second here. So let's see what this looks like. Let's save this. Let us, and this auto reload just reloads a couple of times, so I'll give it a second here. So let's do a correct one, which script source should be correct. So that should show green. And then alert box is not a real thing, so that should show red. And notice it goes away, and then it handles everything pretty well. So in the next video, what we're going to do is create our heads-up display, which is going to display what question number we're on, and then what the user score is. So we'll talk about tracking score there as well. So that's going to do it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, in our last video, we were able to add these pretty nifty classes for correctness and incorrectness. And in this one, we're going to work on our heads up display. So what a heads up display is, if you've never heard of that term, it's basically just information about your game as you're playing. So the things that we care about in this one is things like what number question you're on. So 1 of 5, 1 of 3, things like that. And then what your score is as well. And then usually your heads up display, your HUD, kind of sits on top of your game. So it's usually at the top. So that's what we're going to do. So inside of our HTML, inside of the game here, I'm going to add an ID of HUD. Inside of that, I'll have a HUD item. It will have a p tag with a class of HUD prefix. All right. And then we'll have an H1 with a class of HUD main text. So what this is going to break down to is up here, this first HUD item, it's going to be a question. So which question are you on? And then this main text will show something like 1 of 3. And this is something we're going to have to update dynamically. And then I'm just going to copy this whole thing here. And we're going to say this one is score. And this one will start out at 3. Now we're going to need to reference these things, so we can add IDs here. So not that, but ID equals score for this one. And then for the H1 above, the ID is going to be question counter. All right, so we've got those things laid out. They obviously don't look very good. So let's go ahead and style those. And I can add a little section here for not JUD, but HUD, our heads up display. And as you might expect, we're going to take our HUD and we're going to do a display flex. This is going to, by default, if I type in HUD, it'll work. So this is by default going to put things side by side, horizontally, which is what we want, but we also want to space them out a little bit. So justify content is how you, typically what we've done is use this as center. That's just going to put everything in the center. But there's other options for putting spacing in between your items. So there is something called space around, which will put space. It'll take the available space and it'll divide it between here, here, and here. Otherwise, we can do space between, which will put all of the open space in between these two elements and basically push them to the outside edges. And that's what we want. So that's what we're going to do here. So we can just grab our HUD prefix and set text align center here. And that ought to line up the question and score text. Now this text is looking really small, and I think I'm missing some P styling. So I'm just going to add font size here is going to be to rem, which is more or less 20 pixels. So that looks a little bit better, I think, here. And then also looks like I could style the HUD main text, I think is what it is, HUD main text, and just align that center as well to make sure those line up. So I think this looks pretty good for the display of the HUD. Now we need to be able to dynamically update it. So to do that, we need to get a reference in our JavaScript here to the HUD, or what's the IDs that I used here? I think it's question counter and the score. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my snippet get ID, and the first one's going to be question counter, and then the second one is get ID is not question counter but score. So notice also that we've already used those variables, so I'm going to update these to be text. So the actual text element that we're updating is going to be question counter text. The actual score element that we're going to be updating is score text. So the first thing we want to do is let's grab our HTML. Let's get rid of the 1 of 3 here. Let's just hide that for now. And so that we can do that part dynamically. So after we update our question counter, let's go and update the question counter text to reflect that. So this will be question counter text, and then we want to set the inner text, and we want to set it to two different things. Question, oh, actually this should be a variable. question counter plus a slash, and then the max questions, because we want to show them what number question they're on out of how many. So this is one way to do that. Notice that that updates appropriately. This is just using string concatenation, but there's a better way to do this with ES6 template literals, where if you use the single back quote ticks and put all of your stuff inside of that, you can reference variable names directly inside of that string. So if I use the $sign and then in brackets put that variable, I can get rid of these quotes and I can just type in directly what I want while interpolating variables. So this should give us the same effect here, and it should update as I click on one of these. It should update to question 2 of 3 and 3 of 3, which is pretty cool. So in that same vein, we want to do something very similar using our score. And what we're going to do here is we're going to check whether or not the user got the answer right, and then we're going to increment the score. So I'm going to create an increment score function, which takes in a number and it increments the score, as you might expect, and then it updates the score text. So score text dot enter text equals the new score. All right. So we've got this function, but now we need to call it. So what we'll do is we'll say if class to apply equals correct, then we'll call increment score, and we'll tell it to increment the score by the correct bonus. All right, so let's see what we got here when we do this. The first one should be a source. See if that increments to 10. That's good. The where do we put JavaScript? It goes to script tag. That looks good. And then I should fail this one. Actually, I just got to reload. Sorry. So let's just double check that something here doesn't increment the score. So if it doesn't equal correct, it doesn't increment the score. All right, so that looks pretty good. We're keeping track of our score. We're able to display what question we're on. Now the next thing we want to do in the next video is we're going to update this this little 2 of 3 text, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, things like that. And we want to create a progress bar to kind of show the progress to the user in a more visual way as they go through. So I think this will be a cool exercise to make this a little bit fancier. So that's what we're going to do in the next video, and I will see you there. All right, guys, so in the last video, we got our HUD, our heads up display to work. It looks pretty good, but I think we can make it look a little bit cooler. So right now, under question, it just shows like 1 of 3 here. But it's a little bit neater, a little bit more fun to have a progress bar so you can kind of see your percentage as you go through. So that's what we're going to do in this video. And just so you can see what it looks like, it's going to look something like this. So we're going to have our question. We're actually going to show 1 of 5 up here, and then have the progress bar just kind of fill up as you go through and answer questions. So it'll kind of fill up there. So that's what we're going to do. And the way this works is we're going to have an outside div, which is this kind of empty rectangle. And then we'll have a div that sits right on top of it and just kind of gets bigger and bigger based on the percentage of question that you're on. So that's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and dive in and do it. So inside of our game HTML, we're going to change out this. Let's see. We're going to change out the H1 here, which used to be the question counter text. We're going to update this p tag up top to say, to give it an ID of progress. I don't know why that import is doing that. ID of progress text. That's going to be the word question, and then we're actually going to show the number combination there. But then after that, we want to have a div with an ID of progress bar. Inside of progress bar, we'll have something with a class of progress bar full. Now this inner div is basically going to be the thing that shows how much progress we've made. So it's going to show how full this bar is. So we've got this in our HTML. What error are we getting here? Look at our console, inner text. Okay, so since we've gotten rid of, in here, we're setting the inner text of, where is that? Of our question counter text. This is now going to be our progress text. So we just want to update that. So this one is going to be progress text. and we're going to get it by the progress text ID. And down here, we don't want to reference question counter text. We want to reference progress text. So you can see that works. We're actually going to add on question here too, just so it's kind of obvious what it is. So let's just say question 1 of 3, and this will update the same way that it used to. Question 2 of 3 here, and so on and so on. But now we need to actually style our progress bar. So let's open up the CSS file, and we'll start by working with the progress bar. So we'll grab the progress bar by the ID. We'll say width is going to be 20 rem, and then height is going to be 4 rem. So it's going to be 200 pixels by 40 pixels high. You don't really see anything yet, so let's do a border of 0.3 rem solid, and then we'll use our blue color, which is 56A5EB. So now we should see this kind of laid out here. That's our top box, right? That's our original box. And now we want to work on the inner bar. So let's get our progress bar full. And actually this could probably be, let's do this by ID as well. So let's change this to an ID and go in our HTML and change that there as well. So progress bar full, and make this an ID instead of a class. So our progress bar full, let's say the height is going to be 3.4 rem. The background color is going to match the background or the border color of the container of the parent of the progress bar itself. All right, so you can see by default the inner div, the progress bar full, went ahead and filled up the progress bar parent div. And so the way we're going to do our percentages to show progress is just to set the width property. It's actually pretty simple. So if I set this to 50%, this fills up 50% of the bar, which is pretty good. So that's what we're going to work with. Let's start. This is going to need to start at 0%. So we'll do that. And then let's go into our JavaScript, and we'll want to get a reference to our progress bar full. All right, so we've got the inner item, and basically every time we increment our question, now we want to update the progress bar. And again, the way we're going to do that is just by setting the width property on that progress bar. Super simple, pretty straightforward, but actually has a pretty cool effect. So what we're going to do is grab the progress bar full. We will do style, and then do width. So style is how you can change basically any of your CSS properties. And what we'll do in here is basically, actually before we do that, let's just log out so I can show you what we're going to do. Question counter divided by max questions. Okay, so let's look at the console here. So to start off, this will print out 0.333. When we go to the next one, it'll be 0.6666. So what we actually want to do is take this whole thing that we just did. Did I close it out instead? Take this whole thing that we just did and multiply it times 100 to get a percent. If I add another parenthesis, all right, so that's going to give us 33.333%. And we can take this whole thing, and let's get rid of the log, and we can set the width property to that number. So what this is going to do is going to take question counter, which starts out at 1. It's going to divide by the max number of questions, which is 3 in this case. So 1 divided by 3 is 0.333, and then multiply times 100. So if I save this, we might expect to see this updating here. Let's see. We might expect to see it updating, but it's not quite. So what's going on is this actually needs to be a value in pixels. So we can do our backticks like this, and we can say that we want to evaluate this expression. So that whole thing, so question counter divided by max questions times 100, we can evaluate that whole thing and then add on pixels at the end. And we are missing, looks like I need to move this this parenthesis inside. So I think that's going to do it. So we should see when we start off, we'll see a third. That looks like a little bit less than a third. All right, looks like there's something we're missing here. So let's grab the progress bar full. It's saying, oh, this is not pixels. We actually want this to be percent. So instead of pixels, this will be percent. And then now that should look like a third. This should look like 2/3, and this should look like 3/3. So this gives a pretty obvious way for the user to see that they are on their last question, on their first question, so on and so on. One thing I don't like here is I think there should be a little bit of padding at the top of our progress bar or margin. So let's do a margin top, and we'll do this 1 rem, 10 pixels, push that down just a little bit, and maybe, does that line up now with our score? Maybe we could do 1.5, push it down a little bit more. Let's go all the way to 2 rems. So now I think these look a little bit better together. Actually, I think 1.5 look best. So we've got our progress bar working, which is pretty sweet. In the next video, we're actually going to go ahead and create our end screen where we're going to have to save the user's score, save it into local storage. So we're going to work with local storage, and we're going to work with arrays and local storage, and then figure out an algorithm of whether or not their high score actually makes the top 5 list. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. Hope you guys are enjoying it, and I'll see you there. What's up, guys? In the last video, we worked on improving our heads-up display by adding this progress bar, which I think is pretty sweet. So in this video, we're now going to create our end screen. So we need an end HTML, and we need an end JavaScript file. So in our end HTML, obviously, we'll stub out HTML5 boilerplate. We'll say congrats is the title. And we've done this in the past 2 pages, so I'm just going to kind of copy this in here as well. Inside of the body, we're going to have a container, and then we're going to have the page is going to be ID of end here, and then flex center, flex column. So let's navigate. Actually, let's first put something in there. Hey or hello, whatever. And after we answer all of our questions, so 1, 2, and 3, this should now take us to a working hello page here, or excuse me, end page. And we want to include the CSS, app CSS, so that this looks a little bit better. There we go. And what do we need now? We'll need a reference to our script tag. So script source equals app, or excuse me, end JS. And I think we're ready to go. So let's start by stubbing out what all is going to be inside of this end HTML page. And we're going to start with an H1 here that has an ID of final score. And it's going to be blank to start, or we can just set it at 0 for display purposes. And then we're going to have a form. So what this is for the user to submit their score if they want to. So we don't need an action here because we're going to handle that ourselves. And we're going to have an input of type text, and it's going to have a name of username, an ID of username as well, and then a place holder of username. All right, so we should see a little tiny form there. We're going to have to make this work a little bit better later on, so we will. Then we'll have a button with a type of submit, and we're going to give this a class of button. So since we already have that class that we used before, this is going to go ahead and style up pretty nice. Once we say give this a save text, it should look like what we expect, right? So it looks pretty good. All right. And a few other things we need in here. We need an ID because this is the save score button that we're going to need to get a reference to. Then on click, we're going to set the on click handler inside of the HTML, and it's going to call a function called save high score and pass in the event. All right, and I think this will just give us an error for now since we don't have that defined, that function defined. Yeah, so it threw an error real quick, and then it went ahead and navigated to this, which is what forms do by default. So we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so that's our form, and then we're going to have 2 anchor tag buttons to one to play the game again, and then another one to go home. So these are just anchor tags with a class of button, and then they tell it where to go basically. So this is going to line up pretty well, I think, here. And so the only thing we're missing is styling this this input here. Now I could create in a CSS file for the end screen, but I'm just going to use our app CSS because these are not really specific to the end screen. This is things that would be used on any screen that needed a form basically. So that's why we're going to keep it inside of the app CSS. So let's open that up, and what I want to do is grab any form and say width is going to be 100%, which is fine. This is going to be a display flex, and then set the flex direction to column. So this is going to stack everything on top of each other, which is what I want, and then set the flex. Set the align items to center. So this is going to center everything. Now we need to style the input form. So we're going to grab input, and we'll say give it a little margin bottom, give a little space there. We'll say, let's see, width is going to be 20 rem, so it should match the width of the buttons. The padding is going to be 1.5 rem, give it some space there. All right, starting to look a little bit better. Font size is going to be 1.8 rem to match the size of the buttons as well. The border, we're actually going to take the border away. So we're going to say border none, and then we'll do a box shadow of 0.1 rem, 1.4 rem, 0, and then RGBA 86, 185, 235, and 0.5 as the opacity. So we've seen that before as well. So this is going to give a little bit of box shadow around here. That looks a little bit different than what I thought this should look like. Let's compare it to here. So let's get through to the end screen. This should be 0.5 for the opacity there. That looks better. So that looks pretty good. I don't like how dark that placeholder text is, so I'm going to style that. So you can grab that by doing input and then double colon placeholder. And I just want to change it to a lighter color, so I'm going to use AAA, which will be a pretty light gray there to kind of take some of that away. So what we're also going to do now with our button, we've got a button disabled stuff here. So notice as hover on here, save is hovering, and it makes you think that you can click on it, but we shouldn't let the user click until there's something in the text. So I'm going to start, or actually let's do two things. Let's go ahead and move over to our end screen, and then we'll talk about the disabledness. So let's grab, or actually, sorry, I'm kind of stumbling around here. We've already said save high score is going to be a function. Let's go ahead and define that just so we can kind of see what happens when a user clicks. So we're going to get the event E, and I can console log here. I clicked the save button. And so let's save this. Let's refresh. Let's click save, and you'll probably see something a little weird. Save. You saw that log pop up here maybe for a second, and then it goes away. So forms by default will go ahead and submit to a new page with those form properties as query parameters at the top. So what we want to do is we want to do e.prevent default. So this will prevent the form from taking its default action, which is to then post to a different page. So clicking save now should be okay. It'll just log out, and then I can click this as many times as I want. All right. So this is letting me click, but I don't want to be able to click unless somebody has typed in here. So what I'll do is in our end HTML, I'll come down to our button, and I'll set it to disabled by default. All right, so now I can't click on it, and notice that not click allowed hover state, which is nice. Inside of our JavaScript now, I want to get a reference to the input text, so the username text. So get ID username, that'll get me a reference to it. And then I want to add an event listener for key up. And you might try doing change. Change as an event listener for inputs doesn't probably do exactly what you expect. It really only triggers when you kind of navigate into and away from your input. It doesn't give you a change on every character that you type in, for example. So that's where key up comes in. So just as a test, we can log out every time we key up. Let's do username input dot value. All right, so this should, semicolons go at the end of a line. Save that. And as we type here, now we should see, oh, nope, username input. Oh, just username, I think is what I went with. So username right there. And if I start typing, we should see it pop up over here, which is good. So now we can decide whether or not to disable the save score button based on the input that's in here. So let's get the save score button. Let's see what we called it. Save score button is what we called it. Save score button. All right. And we're going to say save score button disabled, not dispatch, disabled equals, and we're going to disable it if there's no username input or username value. If there's nothing typed in there, if it's falsy, and falsy could be empty string, undefined, things like that. So if there's nothing in there, then set the button to disabled. If there is something there, then that will enable the button for us to submit. So we should see, to start off, this is disabled. That's good. We come in here and type, and now this is enabled, and we can click on it to save, which is great. So we're going to need to do a couple of things in here. One is in the game HTML, or game JS, when we end the game, we want to save off the player score so that we can access it in the end screen. So what this is going to look like is we'll use local storage, and we're going to set an item, and we're just going to set this with a key of most recent score, and we're going to save score into that value. All right, so that works. And then in our end screen, now we want to get, when we load up, we want to get that score. So we'll say const most recent score equals local storage get item. So we want to get something out of local storage, and we want to get the most recent score. And then we want to update this score text. So this score text is in our end HTML the final score. So let's get a reference to that with get ID final score, and we can say final score enter text equals most recent score. All right, so right now by default, let's get rid of the 0 by default and come over to our end screen. So the way you can look at local storage is if you come into your Chrome developer tools, you can open up the application tab, look at local storage, and I've already got some of this stuff saved from the past, but if I change this to 10 as my most recent score, and let me get rid of a couple of these things so that we'll kind of be starting from scratch. If I set most recent score to 10 and refresh, it's going to pull 10 from the recent score. Now you can come in and you can add this key value pair yourself, or what we should do is come into our game page and let's play the game real quick. So let's get a higher score than 10. So script source, I think is right. So that's 10. Then where do we put JavaScript is in a script tag. So that's 20. And then let's do an alert. So this should give us a score of 30 in here. Notice that updated, and then it pulled it in our end screen right here, which is pretty sweet. So that's going to do it for this video. We're going to kind of split this topic in two. So right now we're able to get the high score from the game. We're able to display it, and we're able to handle when a user clicks on the save button. Now in the next video, we'll take a few minutes to work with saving the high scores in local storage and determining whether or not the score is valid for a high score, whether or not it's high enough. And then later on, we'll do the high score screen to pull those scores out. So that's going to do it for this video, and we'll finish up handling the score stuff in the next one. Okay, so we've got our end screen where it's able to load the user score. We've got the disabling and enabling of the save button based on having input in there. So now it's enabled. Now we need to actually figure out how to save high scores into an array of high scores into local storage. So the first thing we want to do is, or first thing I think you need to understand is that local storage only uses key value pairs with the value being a string. So anything that you store in there is going to be a string. So if I tried to set local storage set item, if I tried to set high scores to an empty array, it's not going to like that. So you can see, I don't know if I'll get an error or not, but notice high scores doesn't actually have anything in there. And if I console log the opposite of this, local storage get item high scores, I guess what it will do is just show me an empty string. Yeah, it looks like it's just showing me an empty string. So it's just important for you to understand that things in local storage are stored as a string. So we can actually still work with arrays. We just need to convert them into a JSON string before we do. So if I wanted to convert an array or anything to JSON, I could do JSON stringify. And if I do this, notice that this becomes a string in here. So it's saved as a string that looks like an empty array. And in the console, I should get an empty array back. Now, this is still a string though. So this thing that's coming out of here is a string. So to convert that into an actual array, you could do JSON.parse. So this is what we're going to use is JSON parse and JSON stringify. So now if you look at the console log, we're actually getting an array object out of local storage. So pretty cool. So the first thing we want to do is get a reference to our high scores. So const high scores. And this is, I'm going to change this a little bit. This is actually going to be the get item. And we want to get the high scores, but remember we need to do the parsing. So JSON parse. All right. And then let's just log this to be sure so that we can get a reference to all of these things. All right, so this is actually printing this out if we didn't have anything in local storage. So you're running this application for the first time. If I got rid of this key value pair and ran this again, you'll see what actually happens in the console. It returns null, right? Because there's no item in here called high scores. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we're going to get what's in local storage, or if that returns null, we're just going to get an empty array because we're doing it for the first time. This will go ahead and initialize our empty high scores array. All right. So we've got an array of high scores here. Now what we're going to do inside of our high score is we're going to create a score object that has a score. So it's actually going to reference the most recent score. All right. And then it's also going to have a name, which we're going to get from the username value. All right. So let's log score so you can see what this looks like. Okay. So let's type in James Q Quick. Let's save. And we should see now this is the object getting printed out. So this is what we want to actually add to our array. So we will say high scores dot push, and we'll push on this new score. And then let's log the high scores array. Okay, so let's type in a name here, James Quick, save. Inside of here, you'll see that. If I change it to Jess, for example, save again. Now we have two things in here for high scores. And that's fine. So now typically what would happen is you would save your score and then get navigated away to basically back to the home page. But the one thing we're missing here is we don't necessarily know that this score is going to make the list, the top, and we're just going to save the top 5 scores. So we don't necessarily know that that the score is automatically high enough to make it onto that list. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically add our score to the list. Then we're going to sort our list. Then we're going to cut off anything greater than 5. So if we have 5 items and we add on another one, we will sort it and then cut off the last one because we're going to sort based on decreasing score. So the highest score is going to be first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Anything below that is going to just be cut off. So I actually spent a lot of time kind of fumbling around figuring out how to do this, and then came up with a really pretty simple example, or pretty simple way to do it that I will share with you now. So by default, we're going to go ahead and push on this new score. Then we're going to call highscores.sort. And this is a function built in JavaScript for arrays, where you can define your own sortation algorithm. And what you're trying to do is you're returning either less than 0 or greater than 0. So for us to sort these in highest to lowest, we want to take the B score, which is the second parameter that we have, and subtract the A score. So this is basically saying if the B score is higher than the A score, then put B before A. So if you've seen these kind of functions with arrays and using arrow functions, you might also know that there's an implicit return. So you don't actually have to have the return, and then you don't have to have the brackets, and you don't have to have the semicolon. So all in one line, we can sort this array by doing this line here, and it's going to sort it by score. So that will give us a sorted array, which might have more than five scores. So let's create a variable. So we'll call this max high and set it equal to 5. So now we want to take our high scores array and we want to splice at the 5th index. So this is basically saying at index 5, start cutting off everything after that. So let's see what we got here. Let's say we have James, we have Hess, we have Jess, we have Jessica, we have Lily, and now we've got 5. So what should happen is if I try to add Sevi, it will cut off the last one. It'll cut off that Sevi, and it'll keep the maximum amount of scores at 5, which is great. Now the only thing we're not able to check yet is whether or not the scores are actually being done in order. So let's, instead of just grabbing the most recent score, let's do a math.random and multiply that by 100. So this should give us and we can floor this to get an integer math.floor. All right, so let's save this. Let's try again. So let's start with James gets a score of what, 82. That's not bad. Jess gets a score of 38, which is not as good. Lily gets a score of 39. So notice these are now in order, which is good. Sevi gets a score of 45. So notice they're still in order. And then Padfoot, and these are my dogs that I'm running through here. Padfoot is right here at 40. Now if we try to add another one, let's say I play again and I do James again and save. Now we should have kicked out somebody. So either looks like my score would have been whatever the lowest one was. So my name got kicked out. If I try this again, I might get a higher score than Jess, and now Jess would be bumped out and I moved up to here with 42. So that high score system is working, and it actually becomes pretty simple. So basically the idea here is you go ahead and add the score to your array, you sort it, and then you splice out any of the extra ones. Now the last thing we need to do, well, the two things, is we need to update our local storage. So local storage set item, we need to update the high scores, and we want to update it with our high scores. But remember, we need to stringify this into JSON so that it can be saved as a string in the high scores. So we'll save that. Let's go ahead and get a couple of scores into our high scores just so you guys can see this. So let's say James gets whatever score. What is that? 93. That's pretty good. Let's refresh and notice now that when I get the high scores originally, it includes my score. So that's actually permanently being saved. Now I can add Jess and do a refresh. I should see, again, Jess is pretty bad and I'm pretty good. 93 and 30. So those are being persistent. Now the very last thing we'll do here is when we get done with this, we want to window location assign, and we just want to go back home. So let's go to Actually, I think we could just do slash maybe. All right. So we have, and I can clean this up a little bit by getting rid of this console log and this console log. And so let's say James, save the score and go back home. So the next step here, let me double check my notes here. The next step is to actually create the high score page, which will load those high scores out of there. So that's going to do it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. All right, so we are making a lot of progress with our game. We're able to save our high scores. Now we just need to be able to display them to the user. So we're going to create our high scores HTML, and we're also going to need a high scores JavaScript. All right, so in our HTML, we'll start off with our boilerplate. We'll call this high scores. We will reference the link for our app CSS. We don't need any specific stylings for or actually we do have just a bit, so we'll add another one for high score CSS, and I'll add that file here. All right, so there's I think we've got, just one more thing. Our script, we'll need to include a script to high scores JavaScript. All right, and then inside of our body we'll do, I'm just going to copy these again, and actually I'm just going to copy this because we've done enough typing out HTML. So we've got our standard container, and then our high scores page basically inside of it with flex center and flex column. So what we've got is an H1 that says high scores, then we've got a UL called high scores list, and then a button to go home. So let's navigate over to high scores. And notice we've got the UL, the unordered list, in here somewhere, but there's nothing in it. And that's what JavaScript is going to do for us, is we're going to use JavaScript to populate that list. So this is actually going to be fairly simple inside of high scores JS. One, we want to get a reference to our high scores list. So high scores list, going to be like that. And let me close the project explorer, and then we want to get the high scores out of local storage. So const high scores equals, and this is going to be exactly what we did before. So we're going to JSON parse the local storage get item high scores, and if that doesn't work, if that doesn't return anything, we'll say or empty array. All right, so that way nothing breaks. So let's log this just so we can see that it's there. See that we're getting something back. So high scores and the console. All right, it should be James, and Jess. I'm definitely winning in the numbers there. So that's working. And then we want to go through and iterate through each score. And for each one of those scores, we want to add an LI to our unordered list. Now this is the exact use case for map. So high scores, which is an array, map, we'll get a reference to each high score. And actually, just to shorten this up, I'll call it score. And basically in here, we can do something with each of these scores. So let me just do a couple of logs in here so you guys can see. We're going to get a reference to each one of these. Each one is an object. And what we want to do is we want to create an LI that has both the username and the score inside of it. So let's do template literal, and let's grab the score dot username, and then we'll do a dash, and then do score dot score. So let's log that. Now we should see username. Is that not what I did? Or name, I think, is what I did. All right. So there we go. So you'll see the scores here. We want these to not just be strings. We want these to actually be LIs. So we can create in JavaScript, just say, hey, we're going to create an LI that has that stuff as its content, and then we'll close out the LI. So save this. Now we should see there's LI. And we can also add a class here. So class, so we can just type this in here. So basically we're writing HTML inside of our JavaScript. So save this, and we'll see that the LIs are being printed out. Now this is printing out each li. This is printing out each li total. So what I want to show you with map is I'm going to return this thing, this string for each one of those items, and then console log what the actual output of this whole thing is, which I think is pretty sweet. So when I output this thing totally, notice that it's an array of strings. So what map does is it takes an incoming array, which is high scores, and allows you to convert each of those items to something new in the new array. So we're taking in the score object and we're returning back a string version of an li that has the stuff in it that we need, which is pretty sweet. Now you can also take, since this is an array, you can take a join and join all of those elements in the array, join it with an empty string. And so now I do, no semicolon. Now I'm actually getting a string with all of my li content in here. And you may or may not know where we're going here, but what we're going to do is we're going to say high scores list, which is an unordered list, and we're going to set the inner, actually not set, but inner HTML to this this mapped joined string, if that makes sense. So we save this and refresh. Now we should see these scores are popping up, which is pretty cool, I think. So the only thing left here is to style it. And before we do that, I just want to kind of make sure that you guys, if you're not familiar with map, you spend a little time with this. Just the basic understanding is you take an array of items and you're converting each of those items into something else. For the most part, once you do it a few times, you'll get used to it. Also notice, if you guys have done any React, this is almost exactly how React works, where you're creating JSX, which is really just HTML and a string in JavaScript. And then you're using that to put it on the screen, basically. So that's what we're doing here. And this technique with using map and then turning outputted strings, outputted HTML strings is pretty common in React too. So last thing we want to do is just grab our high scores CSS, and we will say our high scores list. We'll say list style is none. So save that. That'll get rid of the bullet points if I typed it in right, I think. High scores, did I spell that right? Nope, capital L. High scores list, that'll get rid of the bullet points. By default, the items in there have padding to the left because of those bullet points, or they actually just indent them a bit. So let's do padding left is 0 and just line them up on with no padding on the left. And then we'll say margin bottom is 4 rem, just to space it out from the go home button to give a little space. And then for each one of our high score, set the font size to 2.8 rem. All right, we'll say margin bottom for each one of those is going to be 0.5 rem. And last thing we'll do, just a small effect, is just add a hover effect. And we'll do a transform of the score to scale it up to, let's say 1.025. So this will just make it a little bit bigger. If we get, all right, done reloading, just make it a little bit bigger as we go through. So we've got our high scores. We can also, I think I'm missing a little bit in here. We can add, where's our JavaScript file? Add just a space in here to make that look a little bit cleaner. There we go. So we're able to save our high scores. We're able to load them in our high scores screen from local storage, which is pretty sweet. And then we're actually able to go back home and kind of navigate through our application. Now, one extra thing to note, local storage is not secure. As you saw, I could come in to local storage and I could say my most recent score is whatever this really big number is. And you may have seen people do that where they kind of hack games like that in the past. This is not secure. This is just for demo purposes. If you really wanted to do this, you would save it in a database somewhere where no one else could go in and just kind of change what they're saving. But I think we're making a lot of progress. This is really, really cool. We've got a few more videos coming up. The next one, we're going to load our questions from a JSON file instead of from an API, or excuse me, instead of from a static array. Then we're going to actually use a public API to load OpenDB API questions from. Then we're going to add a loader, and then we're going to wrap up. So that's going to do it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, so we've got honestly the majority of our game stuff working, but we're gonna make a few improvements before we get done with this course. And the first thing we're gonna do is, instead of hard coding this array of questions in here, we're gonna actually put them in a JSON file. So we're gonna open up a file called questions.json, and we will take the questions in here, and actually I'm going to copy and paste it in there because a little bit of formatting you have to do. So inside of questions.json file, you'll have your array, and then it looks almost exactly the same, except for these keys and the key value pairs need to be in quotes also. So if you do a copy and paste into this questions.json file, you'll need to make sure that your keys are in quotes. If you don't, it'll give you errors in VS Code. So make sure those are set that way. Otherwise, you can just grab them from the course content and just copy this file into your application. So instead of getting our questions this way, we're going to get rid of that hard-coded set of questions, and we're going to use the fetch API to go out and fetch these questions. So the way this is going to look is we're going to start with an empty array of questions. We're going to use the fetch function, and we're going to fetch questions.json. So in the next video, we're actually going to use fetch to pull questions from an API. This is pulling from a local file, but it works the exact same way. So we're going to fetch questions from there. This returns a promise, so then we can call .then, and we're going to get a response in the .then. Now the response that it returns is probably not exactly what you would expect. So I'm going to log this out, and we'll come over to play here, and open up our console. I don't know why that, oh, I do know why. So that just skipped right over our application because we have an empty array of questions, and as you know, when we run out of questions, it goes to the end screen. So we'll come back to that. But I can leave my logs. How do I do that? Preserve log, and then go to play again. Now, even though it navigated away, it can show me what it logged out. So this is basically like an HTTP response, and really what we want out of that is a JSON version of the data. So inside of a promise, you can return a promise. So response, or excuse, this should actually be just res. So res.json will get out of this HTTP response, it'll get the body and convert it into JSON. And so we can return that inside of this promise. And because of that, then we can do a .then on that, and we can say this is the loaded questions. And then I can console log loaded questions. And this should be the actual JSON part that we want. So let's do play again. And see, in promise loaded questions is not defined. Loaded questions. Typing is one of the most important things you can do as a programmer. So let's go play again, and we should see our questions are actually being loaded. I'm not going to show them to me from that array, which is fine. So from here, what I want to happen is, instead of calling start game immediately, I want to wait to call start game until I've got my questions back. So I'll call start game there, and I'll say my questions I'll get from the questions that I just loaded. All right, so if I save this, we should be able to go back to play again, see our questions are being loaded here, and be able to answer and play our game just like we thought. So let's just finish out. We'll get a score of 0. Because of that, we might want to play again. Now, one thing to notice is, and we'll fix this in a couple videos from now, is when we load this screen, you see that dummy text pop up before you see your actual real question being prompted. So eventually we're going to add a loader to help make that look a little bit better. But for now, this is what we're going to do. So just best practice here, when you do make a request with fetch and with other things that return promises, you also want to handle the catch, which is the error scenario. So in here, if I was to type in the wrong path to the file, it's going to trigger this error, and I could error out that error message to the console. So if I look at my console, this is going to say unexpected token. So it failed to parse JSON because that's not real JSON, because that's not a real file, and it threw an error, and then I just logged it out to the console. So this is typically something you'll want to do. We don't really have any fancy error cases here. You might flash up a message that says like fail to load questions, go back to the home screen and try again, or you might give the user a button to try to refresh the questions or something like that. It doesn't really matter, but just know in general, when you make these type of requests or make anything that returns a promise, you want to handle that catch case too, so that if something goes wrong, you know what to do. But with this being typed in correctly, it should work just as we expect. All right, so it looks really good. So I'm pretty happy with this. I just wanted to kind of show you guys, one, get a primer for fetch, and then show you it's a little bit cleaner to save those questions inside of another file instead of inside of this file, and then go ahead and pull it in with fetch. So in the next one, we're actually going to use the OpenTriviaDB API, which gives us a public way to get questions that people have already submitted, and it's got 3,200 verified questions, and we can go and grab those so that we don't have to write our own, and we can use those for our users. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. I'm excited about it. I hope you guys are too, and I'll see you there. All right, guys, so in the last video, we worked on fetching our questions from a questions.json file. So using the fetch API here, we put our questions in a JSON file, and then we basically call to get those questions from that file. So what we're going to do now is instead we're going to use an API called the Open Trivia Database, and this API lets you make a remote API call to get a list of questions. So if you look at their API here, they've got a couple of different properties that you can set on your query. So number of questions, we'll do 10. We'll do general knowledge as a category. We'll do easy as a difficulty. We'll do multiple choice. And then we can leave a default encoding. So we can generate the API URL. And what this does, we can copy this and open this in the browser. And what we'll get back is a list of questions. So you can see here, it's got two properties. One is the response code, and then the results. And the results is with the actual data in it. So you can see this is an array of questions. Each question has a category, a type, difficulty, the question, the correct answer, and then incorrect answers. So you'll notice that this, the format of how they store these questions are a little bit different than what we've been doing so far. So what we're going to do is we're going to query these questions or fetch these questions using the fetch API. So we're going to paste in this URL here. So we're going to paste it right into there. And let's get rid of the file explorer. And then instead of doing all of this stuff, I'm going to log out what the loaded questions are. So let's refresh this. Still got our live server running, and I think that's right. So there's our data that we get back from this API. Obviously this is super easy. This is the benefit of things like public APIs. If I wanted to log out just the results, results. So do that, then I should see that array of questions right there. So what we need to do is transform each of these questions into something, into the format basically that we work with in our app. So the way we're going to do this is, if you think about what we just said, we want to convert the questions that we get into a new form. So we can use a map. So this is iterating through an array and then transforming each item in that array into something else. So we're going to do our loaded questions.results.map, and inside of here we'll get each individual loaded question, and then we need to figure out how to transform it. So what I want to start with is I'm going to create a formatted question, and it's going to be an object with a question property, and it's coming from the loaded question, and this should actually be singular up here. So loaded question dot question. So the formatted question, this thing right here, that's what we're going to return out of this map. So every time we map through, we're going to get the original question. We're going to format that question into the format that we need and return that, and then we'll have the array of questions in the right format that we need. So we need to start building this up. So what I want to do is I want to get the answer choices, and I want to use the spread operator from loaded question dot incorrect answers. All right, so this is going to give us basically an array. We're going to copy that array of what the three answer choices are. These are the incorrect ones. And what I eventually need is 4 answer choices and then the answer for the correct answer in a random position, either A, B, C, or D, or 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the formatted question.answer. I'm going to get a random number between 0 and 3. So I'm going to do a math.floor math random times 3, and I need to add 1 on the end of this. So this is going to give me a random index. Did I get all that right? Math.random times 3. Yeah. The random index between 0 and 3. So I'm basically going to go ahead and decide which choice is my answer. And then I'm just going to put that answer into my answer choices array in the right spot. So this is going to be answer choices dot splice. And then we're going to say formatted question dot answer minus 1, because our answer choices are not 0-based indexes. We need 0-based index. Then we're not going to remove any elements. And then we're going to put in loaded question dot correct answer. So at this point, we should have answer choices should have all of our answer choices in them with the correct answer in a random position. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to iterate through the answer choices, do a for each, and we're going to get a reference to each choice and the index that it's at. And then we're going to say formatted question, and we're going to get the property choice and then the index plus 1. This might be a little tricky for you guys, so I just want to kind of talk through what we're doing. So we're going to iterate through each of the answer choices that we have here. We want to put them as answer 1, answer 2, answer 3, answer 4, or choice 1, 2, 3, 4 on the formatted question. So to do that, we're just going to dynamically get that property. So choice plus whatever that index is plus 1, and then assign that choice to that thing. Then at the end here, we're just going to return formatted question. So let's say questions equals. So let's go ahead and assign that to our regular questions. And let's do a start game and see if that works. All right, so we've got an undefined here, which looks like we're missing something on the question. So question, that shouldn't be plural, that should be singular. Let's see if that works. What is the largest organ of the human body? The large intestine, probably. So who is depicted on the $100 bill should be Benjamin Franklin. Looks like that's right. So it looks like we are actually pulling the questions correctly. And the thing we want to fix, so this is super cool. We don't have to store our own questions or anything. We can use this open API. The one thing I want to add here is when we refresh this page, you'll see that we see that dummy data first before we actually pull a question. So what we're going to do in the last video is add a loader. So we're not going to display any of this information until we're actually finished loading the questions, and then we'll display the questions. So that's going to do it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, in the last video, we were able to load our questions from the open trivia DB. So being able to call an API and load those in means we don't have to store them. We don't have to create all of our questions. This is a great use case in general for API. So if you're looking for data, see if you can find a public API in general. And then in our application, when we start here, we have this kind of delay where we show some dummy question information just because we have it kind of hard coded in here. And what we're going to do, let's go ahead and take this stuff out. So let's delete all of these. Okay, so we've got all of our question information hidden. So now when we refresh, we should just kind of see this blank screen. Now this is obviously not very good, right? Because we don't want to show them just a blank screen before we load our data. So this is where we're going to come in and do our loader, just to kind of give the user an idea that we're taking some time to do something. The game will be ready in a second. So all we're going to do in our HTML is going to create a div with an ID of loader. All right, so that's all we're going to do there, and it's going to sit right on top of the game. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to add the hidden class to our game to start. So we'll hide the game, and you don't see anything because we need to add our styles for loader, but we could say loading in here. So you'll see there that is. but we don't actually need text. What we're going to do is style that with CSS to make an actual loader. So we're going to hide our game by default, and then we'll go in and show our loader initially. And then when we finish loading, we'll switch that over. And when we finish loading, we'll switch that over to show our game. So now let's open up our game CSS, and we'll add the styles at the bottom here for our loader. So what we want to, let me show you just really quickly, if you guys can see real quick what this loader looks like. Oh, it didn't actually show there. I guess it's coming in pretty fast, so we're not seeing it. So we'll just kind of talk through what we're doing and go from there. So we're going to start with selecting our loader, and we want to make a circle for the most part, a spinning circle. So we're going to give a border, and this is going to be 1.6 rem solid white. And then we'll have a border radius is 50%. So this is how we're going to get kind of the circular effect. And we'll do a border top is 1.6 rem solid. And then this is where we're going to use a color. So 56A5EB. Does that look right? Yeah. And we'll do a width of 12 rem and a height of 12 rem, which again is basically 120 pixels. So if I save this and let it show up on the screen, you can see because of, and actually let's just tweak a little bit of this so we can kind of break down how it's working. Let's select our loader, and just to show you, without the border radius being 50, you get kind of a square here. And this makes a little bit more sense. So with this, with it being looking like a square, you can see you've got your border of white. Then you're basically overriding the top border to be a blue color, which is pretty obvious here. And then you've got a height and width for this to be 120 pixels basically. So then adding in this border radius makes it into a circle. So what we want to do is we want to have basically this entire thing spin. So we're going to use an animation to do that. And the way we do animation is we'll do keyframes, and then we'll name the animation, so we'll call it spin. And then we basically want to set styles for different percentages or different breakpoints, if that's a good way to put it, along the spin cycle. So we're basically just going to have a start and finish. And so it's going to start at 0%. And here it's going to transform, and it's going to start at 0 degrees. And you can actually type in DEG there to get degrees. And then it's going to finish by having spun not 199%, but 100%. So that's going to be the finish. And it will have rotated 360 degrees at that point. So this is a transform. All right. So you won't actually see anything happen now because we haven't applied this animation to our loader even after we save. So to do that, we need to say animation, and we want to say we want to use the spin animation. We want it to last 2 seconds. We want it to be linear, which means it's going to kind of constantly make progress as it spins. It's not going to spin faster or slower at the beginning or the end. And then we want it to infinitely loop. And so we save here now, and we should see our loader looks pretty good. Now this is actually, if you guys are interested, this is from W3 Schools, Build a Loader. So this is exactly what they do there. This is the quickest and easiest way that I've seen to build a loader without bringing in an extra library, doing something really, really fancy. So you guys can obviously tweak this and make it look a little bit different if you want to. But if you want an extra, just kind of written version of how to do this, you can go and look at this example on W3 Schools. All right, so we've got our loader. Now the only thing we need to do is when we load our questions, and that happens in the here. So when we right before we call start game, we know we've got our questions, so we're ready to show the game and hide the loader. So we want to get a couple more references to DOM objects. The first one is going to be, and this is my get ID shortcut, first one is going to be just loader, all right? And then the second one is going to be game. And in here we can call game.classList and then remove the hidden class. And so just this by itself will do something a little bit weird. So it'll show these two side by side, which is not what we want. And then we want to take the loader.classList and add hidden. So we want to basically just swap these out. Now you'll see your loader stays there at the beginning. Then as you get your questions loaded, it will go away and you can see your questions. So this works really well. We're going to make this a little bit better. And the way we're going to make this a little bit better is right now we are loading our questions and then showing the screen. But technically we haven't actually displayed the new question yet. So it's hard to see this difference because it's minute, it's milliseconds. But really the optimal way to do this is to take this and put it inside of the start game function, and we'll put it right at the very end so that we don't show our game until we absolutely know that we've got our first question and it's been added and displayed on the screen. So you won't really see a difference here when we save. You'll still see the same effect. There's a loader, and then when we finish loading the questions and displaying the first question, now that loader will go away and we can see our game. All right, so I think that's a pretty neat effect to add. I think this is great for user experience as well. You definitely don't want to show like dummy data while the user is waiting. You also don't really want to show a blank screen. So by adding a loader, you give them some sort of context to let them know that something is happening, which is really, really great. So that's going to wrap it up for this video, and I will see you in the next one. You did it. You're finished. I first want to say thank you for taking the course, and then also congratulations on making your way all the way through. Now, I put a lot of time and effort into creating this content in the hopes that it provides a good learning opportunity for you, and I hope you were able to improve your core web development skills with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, I hope to see you in the future in one of my other videos, mini courses, or premium courses. If you're interested in learning more about that content, you can check out learnbuildteach.com, where you can see all of those things, videos, courses, etc. And then also subscribe to my newsletter, where I'll send you notifications or emails about the content that I have when it's coming out and when you can check it out. So again, I just want to thank you for taking the course. I really appreciate having your support. I hope it was worth it for you, and I hope to see you in the future in a future video.